There's a type of person you keep falling for. Different faces, different names, different cities maybe, but somehow the same energy, the same emotional pull, the same dynamic playing out again and again. You've probably noticed it. Most people do eventually, but very few ever stop to ask the one question that actually matters. Why? Not, why do I keep choosing wrong? But why does a specific type of person even feel magnetic to you in the first place? Why do some accents, some personalities, some cultural qualities feel like something you recognize, even when you've never experienced them before? The answer isn't in your adult life. It goes much, much further back. Attraction isn't random. Science has known this for decades. What we're drawn to as adults, the personalities, the values, even the physical and cultural traits, is quietly shaped long before we're old enough to make conscious choices. Your earliest experiences, the people around you, the emotions you absorbed, the stories you heard, all of it left imprints on your psychological blueprint. And that blueprint? It runs most of your romantic life without your permission. In this video, we're going to explore what that means. We'll go deep into attachment theory, cross-cultural attraction, early exposure psychology, and one of the most fascinating and underexplored questions in modern psychology. How does what you experienced as a child quietly determine who you fall in love with as an adult? Stay until the end, because the final insight might completely change how you see your own pattern. Most people think attraction happens in the present. You meet someone, something clicks, and you feel drawn to them. Simple enough. But developmental psychologists argue the real mechanics of attraction were set in motion years, even decades earlier. John Bowlby's attachment theory, first developed in the 1950s and expanded by Mary Ainsworth through the 1970s, proposed that the emotional bond we form with our earliest caregivers creates what he called an internal working model. Think of it as your brain's first map of what love and closeness feel like. If your primary caregiver was warm, consistent, and emotionally available, your brain learned that intimacy is safe. You become what researchers call securely attached. But if your caregiver was unpredictable, emotionally distant, or overwhelming, your nervous system learned something very different. It learned to associate love with tension, with longing, with the need to earn affection. And here's the unsettling part. That template doesn't disappear. It hides. Then, in adulthood, it quietly steers you toward the people who feel familiar, even if familiar means painful. But that's only half the story. Because the internal blueprint isn't just about emotional dynamics. It's also about culture, identity, and the things you were exposed to before you even had words for them. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the mere exposure effect. Simply put, the more we're exposed to something, the more we tend to like it. This was first studied by social psychologist Robert Sajonc in 1968. He found that repeated exposure to almost any stimulus, images, sounds, ideas, even faces, increases a person's positive feelings toward it. Now apply that to childhood. A child who grows up in a multicultural environment, who watches films or reads stories featuring people from diverse backgrounds, who hears different languages, or is exposed to different value systems, that child's sense of familiarity expands. And familiarity, in the psychology of attraction, is a powerful precursor to desire. This is one of the reasons researchers have found that individuals raised in cross-cultural households or in environments that emphasize international perspectives often report attraction toward personalities and physical types that differ significantly from their immediate surroundings. The brain isn't searching for what's different, it's searching for what resonates. And resonance is built from early exposure. Here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Cultures don't just look different, they feel different. They carry distinct emotional registers, different ways of expressing care, loyalty, strength, femininity, masculinity, directness, and warmth. A child raised in a Western household, but frequently exposed to Eastern European cultural values, through literature, family connections, films, or even early relationships, begins to develop what researchers call a cultural attraction schema, a subconscious sense of what certain qualities feel like. Take the cultural archetype of Russian femininity, for example. In Russian cultural tradition, women are often portrayed as deeply loyal, intellectually formidable, emotionally intense, and capable of profound devotion, while simultaneously possessing a kind of quiet resilience and directness that is distinct from many Western social norms. For someone exposed to these values in childhood or adolescence, even indirectly, these qualities can become encoded as attractive, not because they are objectively superior, but because the brain recognizes them as familiar, as close to an internal ideal that was quietly formed long ago. This is cultural imprinting, and it's far more common and far more powerful than most people realize. Now, here's the part that most people get completely backwards. We assume that what we find attractive reflects something about the other person, their beauty, their personality, their culture. But what psychology actually suggests is far more confronting. What we find attractive reflects something about us, about our history, about the emotional gaps we're still trying to fill, about the version of ourselves that was formed before we even knew who we were becoming. There's a concept in psychoanalysis called repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate early emotional dynamics, even painful ones, in adult relationships. Freud identified it. Modern attachment researchers have expanded it, and behavioral data strongly supports it. People don't just fall for types by accident. They fall for types because something in that person's energy, personality, or presence echoes something their nervous system already knows. Sometimes that echo is beautiful. Sometimes it's the repetition of a wound. The critical difference? Awareness. Because once you understand the blueprint, you're no longer controlled by it. Children are meaning-making machines. Long before they understand relationships intellectually, they are absorbing emotional templates from stories. The films they watch, the books they read, the cultural narratives in the air around them. All of it contributes to what psychologist Sandra Murray calls the ideal partner prototype, a mental image of who feels right that forms in childhood and persists, often unconsciously, into adulthood. International media exposure during childhood has been shown to expand these prototypes dramatically. A child who grows up watching films or reading stories featuring emotionally rich, culturally distinct characters develops attraction schemas that span beyond their immediate cultural environment. This is why researchers studying cross-cultural attraction consistently find that early international exposure, travel, multilingual environments, international friendships, or even diverse media consumption is one of the strongest predictors of cross-cultural romantic preferences in adulthood. Your childhood brain was building a database. Every story it absorbed, every personality it encountered, every emotional tone it resonated with, it filed all of it away. And when you meet someone who matches enough of those filed-away impressions, your heart says yes before your brain has time to ask why. One dimension of this conversation that often gets overlooked is parental modeling. Children don't just absorb what they're told, they absorb what they see. The way their parents treat each other, the qualities each parent embodies, the emotional dynamics that surrounded them in their formative years. Research consistently shows that individuals are statistically more likely to be attracted to partners who share key personality or even physical characteristics with their opposite-sex parent, a finding supported by studies at the University of Pécs and replicated across multiple cultural contexts. But it goes further. In homes where one or both parents modeled qualities associated with a specific cultural background, warmth, stoicism, intellectual depth, emotional directness, deep loyalty, those qualities become embedded in the child's attachment ideal. The parent wasn't just a caregiver. They were, in a very real psychological sense, a prototype. Here is the deepest truth this science is pointing toward. We don't choose who we fall for. Not really. Not at first. The initial pull, that sense of recognition, that feeling of being drawn towards someone in a way you can't fully explain, that's not a conscious choice. That's your entire developmental history speaking. But here is what makes this empowering rather than frightening. Once you understand the architecture of your own attraction, once you can trace the threads back to their origins, you gain something most people never have. Clarity. You stop asking, why do I always fall for this type? And start asking a better question. What does this pattern tell me about what I actually need? Because sometimes the type you're drawn to isn't the wound repeating itself. Sometimes it's your deepest self reaching towards something that genuinely fits. A quality, a cultural energy, a personality type that was always going to resonate with who you are. The work isn't to override attraction. The work is to understand it. To know whether you're being pulled by history or pulled by genuine compatibility. To tell the difference between chasing a ghost and finding a home. Your childhood shaped a great deal of who you are, but it doesn't have to dictate who you become or who you choose. Attraction is a language, and like any language, it becomes richer, more intentional, and more honest when you understand where it came from. The blueprint was written early, but you're not finished writing. If this video shifted something for you, or raised a question you're still sitting with, drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to go deeper into the psychology of attraction, relationships, and why we are the way we are, subscribe. There's a lot more coming.